Hey guys, this is Caleb with DSLR Video Shooter, and today we're finally reviewing the Sony a6500. Now, before we jump in, this review is for video features on the a6500. I will not be covering stills or photo-related specs and features. Secondly, I have a guide coming out soon for the a6500, and I'll be announcing that here on YouTube before long. And there's a lot more to this camera than meets the eye. So, with this camera, I had very similar feelings to when I first reviewed the a6300. This camera is so good and so bad all at the same time. And by the end of this review, you'll understand what I'm talking about. Out of the box, this camera is very similar to the a6300, but with a couple upgrades. The first thing I noticed was the much larger grip. It's really nice. It takes it from almost a point and shoot feeling to a nice beefy handle, and I really dig that. There's also an additional custom functions button on the top, which is awesome. Gives us another button that we can assign a function to. Features wise, let's start with autofocus. It is still amazing on this camera. I talked in my a6300 guide about how that camera, the a6300, really had me rethinking autofocus for video. It is so good, and this camera continues that with an added bonus of having touch focusing. So on the rear of the camera, you can tap various parts of the screen and change the focus, and this works really well. It also is very seamless. So a lot of the time what I've been doing is if I'm panning and I have autofocus just doing its thing, autofocus continuous, I can tap a part of the screen as I'm panning, it'll focus to that, and then as I pan away from it, I'll just tap the center button on the back of the camera. It'll cancel the touch focus and resume autofocus continuous, all without ever knowing that I did that. So it's so seamless. The autofocus is still just darn good. Hats off to Sony for what they're doing with autofocus. I love not having to almost ever touch the focus ring on Sony lenses with this and the a6300. And I'm a total believer and really excited about autofocus going forward when it comes to video. In the overheating department, things are much better on this camera. On my a6300, even here in the studio on a cool day, temperatures are, no higher than 70 degrees. I would get the warning signal after a certain period of time if I was using the battery in the grip and didn't have the screen, folded open. On this camera, I have had no problems. I haven't even had the warning show up. And I haven't even gone in and changed the setting that this camera has, which is a new feature where you can go in and essentially adjust the heat sensitivity. So letting the camera run longer, hotter, before it turns off. So it is improved. You do have a menu option to extend the amount of time the camera stays on. That doesn't mean that this camera won't overheat. So if you're going to be shooting outdoors in the sun in New Mexico, you're probably going to run into issues at some point. Next thing on list is stabilization, which is a new feature on this camera. We have in-body stabilization, and it works really well. As you can see here, I recorded a clip, and while the recording was running, I turned on and off stabilization, and it's pretty pronounced, especially at longer focal lengths, and it works really well. And I love having the ability to put a manual lens on this camera and still have stabilization. So we have in-body stabilization. It does work well. It's not as good as Panasonic's. Panasonic's is ridiculously good now, but it is obviously a huge step up from the a6300, which did not have in-body stabilization. When it comes to video quality and all of that, this camera is very similar to the a6300. We still have 4K at 30 and 24 and up to 120 frames per second at 1080. The thing I noticed that's new on this is what's called S&Q, or slow and quick. So there's a new way to go about setting up slow motion and quick motion in camera. Once you activate those settings, you'll be able to have the camera conform things down to slow motion or speed things up and have a time-lapse video on your camera. So that's all the good stuff. Let's address some of the not so cool stuff and why this camera kind of irks me. The first thing I always notice when I pick it up to film with it is the lack of a flip out screen. We're still working with this weird up and down flippy dealio, which I'm convinced at this point that someone paid someone at Sony millions of dollars to create this, and they have so much sunk into it financially that they're just going to go with it until, it makes sense to redesign it. but it's only useful if you're behind the camera. So this camera has incredible potential to be the end-all YouTuber and vlogger camera, but because we have no flip-out screen or even a flip-up, we can't really use this without external equipment. So yes, you could use your phone linked with it with the app, but the app is kind of laggy. It doesn't have a lot of features, and it locks a lot of the camera settings. So that's an issue. And if you go with an HDMI device, you have to power that thing. You have a cable coming out of the camera. And when shooting in 4K, the back screen turns black when you hit record in 4K, and your monitor won't show any information. So they've kind of screwed us over when it comes to anything where you're not right behind the camera. So that's where the G85, which is what you're watching right now, is a great camera. You've got the flip out screen, tons of other great features. It's perfect for vlogging. I'd love to recommend this one, and I still would if you're willing to put up with a little extra equipment. But I just wish we could just take this and vlog with it, or shoot YouTube videos and see ourselves, but we can't. Battery life has not been improved at all. In fact, I think it's a little worse because of all the new features that are added to this camera. It's now doing the touch focus work as well as that in-body stabilization. So it's still terrible, just like the a6300. The other thing is the SD card placement is still underneath the camera. This has always bothered me, and I wish Sony would do what Panasonic did with the G85, where as they upgraded the camera, they moved the card from underneath to the side on the grip, which is so much better. So please, Sony, if you can do that on the A67 or whatever's next, that would be amazing. And I really love that on the G85, but we're still dealing with the little flippy door, having to remove the camera from some tripods to get at the SD card slot. The menus are better. We have color, so we can see a little more clearly the different tabs, but you still can't really navigate very easily. They've added more stuff and they've moved things around, but they still have weird names that are hard to remember, and it's just jumbled all over the place and very odd places for some things. So it'd be great if they just figured out, or even just straight up copied another manufacturer like Canon or Panasonic, gave us a menu system that we can actually navigate. And I love to see the touch capabilities of this camera work with the menu system, because all things touch on this camera are pretty much exclusively used for focusing. So it'd be great to open up the menu and be able to tap around, as opposed to, you know, navigating the laggy, huge menu system as it is. And finally, we have no headphone jack, which honestly I'm okay with, because this camera isn't priced in that bracket. You're gonna have to jump up to around a $2,000 camera or higher to get that kind of a feature. So now we're kind of getting into the final thoughts and recommendations for this camera. So the landscape is pretty interesting right now for shooters. We have so many good options. So when you're thinking about this camera, I'm sure you've already considered the older a6300, which would save you around $400. So if you're considering those two cameras, you need to decide if in-body stabilization, slightly redesigned body, and the touch focusing capabilities, if those are worth it to you for $400 extra bucks. Also overheating, it's going to do a much better job at high temp situations, whereas the a6300 won't. But if you go with the a6300, you're going to be saving that money, and it's still an amazing camera. You're not really going to be losing a lot of image features. It's just added bonuses, and the image is still going to be awesome. And a lot of you are considering the brand new GH5. So these two, a lot of you have asked which one to go with. You're going to spend another $600 for this guy, but as I'm finding out, this is pretty much the best all-around camera right now. But if you don't need waveforms, headphone jacks, a bigger body, and all the crazy features this has, this is still an amazing little camera, and the size difference, especially the weight difference, is very much significant. Finally, another option to consider is the Panasonic G85, which is what I'm filming with right now. I love that camera. I think it's one of the better vlogging cameras right now. It shoots 4K, has a flip out screen, great image, really good stabilization, and pretty doggone good autofocus. It's not as good as this camera, but it's still much better than a lot of cameras out there. So at the end of the day, this is one of definitely my favorite cameras. The only thing I would say is potentially a no-go is if you are going to be filming yourself. So if you're behind the camera, you can't beat this. I love the size. You can easily throw it on a gimbal, but it also can kind of be built up for interview style scenarios. But if you're going to be vlogging or YouTubing, you will need some external gear to make it work. And it's just going to be a little more finicky. So that's the biggest thing I would consider if I were in your shoes deciding between this and other cameras. Otherwise, this is a great low light, autofocus, stabilized little beast of a 4K camera. And if I were starting over from absolute scratch right now, I'd probably go with this and would use it as my main machine when it comes to filming. So hope you've enjoyed this video. Let me know if you have any questions at all below. I'm hopefully going to be doing some comparison videos and cover more in-depth, versus videos between this and other cameras that I've been using, and try to help you guys figure out which camera, if you're going to be buying a new one, is right for you. So that's going to do it for this video. You can find more videos here at DSLR Video Shooter every single week. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.